Let's put this Ithaca back together. We're going to start with the magazine tube, just because it's easy and we'll get it out of the way. It has a pressed ring around the end. Your follower has a large end. Small end goes in first on the opposite end from that pressed ring. So small end in first from this end, the end where the hole is. Let it fall. Take your spring, push your spring into the tube. Now, from here, you're going to have to kind of milk it in a little bit. Just keep collapsing it. And then this end piece fits on the end of the spring, and you can use that to help push the spring into the tube. Turn it so that the holes line up. See the hole there? And then if you look at your knurled pin, you have the machine pieces that cause it to flare out on one side. That's the side that you want sticking out. So, small end into the large hole, and then use your hammer to tap that in until it's seated. All you want to do is tap that pin until it flushes up on one side and is still raised up on the other. You want it raised up because that's the piece that will lock into the tube later. Alright, let's go ahead and replace the bolt. This engagement piece here goes in from the right. Now if you notice, because of the machining, you cannot put it in from the wrong side. So this is one of the few pieces on here that are, for lack of a better term, idiot proof. Put it in there, press it as tight as you can with your finger, nylon hammer, nylon drift punch, smack that until it's seated, and that piece is in. Next thing we're going to do is put the extractor back in. To put the extractor in, take your extractor spring and just put it in the slot on top of the bolt, and then you'll see there is a machined round cut at the bottom there that sets in. Basically put a little bit of grease on there and then put it in, and that grease will make it stick in place. Once you have that in, your extractor goes in next. Now the extractor goes in so that the L-shaped cut right here, that spring, sets right up against that, so that this hook faces down towards the inside of the bolt. So flip it over like that. Round side here should be up and facing out. Set it in there so that that spring sets in that little L-shaped cutout in the back side. You'll see right here where the spring is, and you'll also see right here where the pin goes. Alright, once you see what you need to do to line that up, you usually have to push it down and backwards a little bit. Get your pin started. Again, you have the machined end. The knurled end faces up. The small end goes into the hole on the extractor. Now, the trick is to get everything lined up while you push this in. What I like to do is take a tapered pin punch and press down on this side while I flip it over and look at this side. And then what I do is I'm using the pressure on this pin punch to keep that in place, and then once I get the hole lined up, I tap it a couple of times. Just pick the whole thing up and tap it on that pin punch that I'm using to press that in. Do that a couple times and that will get it in far enough that everything will stay and you can let go. And then just switch to an appropriately sized drift pin, or drift punch rather, to finish tapping that in. When you tap it in, you'll want it just below flush on the extractor side so that it is also just below flush on the bolt side. Now these two pieces go in next, but they will fall out on you on occasion while you're not paying attention when you put it back together, so you can put them in now or put them in right before you place it in the gun. I'll show you how to put them in now. Firing pin goes in first. The same side that you had that piece in is the side that the firing pin goes in. Notice there's not enough cutout to put it in on the wrong side. The curved part is the part that your hammer actually strikes. There's a hole in the back right here that curved piece fits into, just like that, so that this will slide back and forth right there. This block sets right on top of it, and again, because of the way it's machined, it won't go in wrong. You want the holes facing out, just like that, and it will slide back and forth. When you reassemble this, you'll just move that back and forth to make sure that the holes line up for those screws to engage it. Now to start working on the receiver, from your stripped receiver with all those pins out, this block is the next thing we're going to put in. If you remember, that block had that little spring and deton on there. Again, I put just a little bit of silicone grease on it, just to make sure that it doesn't fall out while I'm doing everything else. That tiny little hole is where they go. Spring side first, with the deton facing out, just like that. Press it down as far as it'll go. Now when you put this in, it just goes all the way forward against the front of the receiver, and then straight down. And what will happen is that little deton that you just put in is going to hang up inside the receiver right there. What you need is a tiny little screwdriver to press that detent, and as you depress that, push down on that block so that it goes down and is held in place by this. Once that's in, just push it all the way down until it stops. Once you get that loading block in there, next piece we're going to do is this side plate that goes on the right side. Now if you look at this, it looks like it would go in down so that it lines up with the pins inside there. However, it goes in with these ridges facing up, because later on the lever is going to engage those to help cock the hammer and lift that bolt, or lift that loading block. So it'll go in that position. Plastic piece goes in that hole with the cutout facing towards the front of the gun. When you look inside there, you'll see a recess right there, that square shaped cutout. That's where that plastic thing slides into. Hold this plate so that that plastic piece is at about a 90-degree angle. Now in order to get that to stay in position while you're working with it, put some silicone grease on there to make it stay in position. Slide it inside the receiver, lining up that plastic piece inside that groove, that cutout, and it will slide in just like that. Once it's in, just grab that piece and slide it forward until it's slid all the way forward, and then rock that piece backwards. Push it until that plate lines up with that post, and then just seat it on that post. Flip this around this way so it stays on that post, and it will set in there just like that. What we're going to put on next is that little spring. And that spring is held in by a pin that has a nail shape. The nail head goes on the inside, so you'll insert that pin into the receiver from the inside and almost flush it up at that hole. This is one of those places where having a pair of hemostats or small needle nose pliers is great, because you can grab that as high up as you can so that it clears the spring and the pin. Insert it so that the foot of the spring, you want that little foot facing towards the back of the gun, and that little foot bent down against the wall of the receiver. To actually put it in to make sure it's positioned properly, turn it so that it's facing up and down with the long side up towards the top of the receiver and the short side down. Insert it in that position and set the pin as deep into that hole as you can get it so that it'll stay in place, just like that. take your screwdriver or whatever flat tool you're using, set it against the head of that screw, or that pin rather, and tap that until it sets almost flush. Now the short side of the spring is against the wall of the receiver, which is what gives the long side of the spring the spring return action. Next thing we're going to insert is this plate. As you insert this into the gun, you want to insert it in kind of a 90-degree angle, up and down, so that it clears all of the posts, all of these posts and stuff on the inside that it needs to clear. The L shape needs to go up and facing towards the back, so that this little moon-shaped cutout is towards the bottom of the receiver and facing the front of the gun. It goes in the gun, in the receiver, and fits on top of that post. This hole goes right on that post. So about a 90-degree angle to make sure it clears all of the internal pieces. Set it on that post, just like that, and then it will tip forward until it engages that spring. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert these two pins. They will be flush on the outside and sticking in on the inside. The first one we're going to do is the one that goes on this side because it holds this plate in place. Again, these pins are knurled. They're small and smooth on one side, and they've got the machining that causes them to flare a little bit on the back side. Insert it into the gun, small end first, so that the small end is going into the gun, and the large end is actually what grabs the metal around the edges of the hole on the outside. On the inside of the receiver, depress that plate so that that pin is inserted far enough that it holds that plate down. Once you have it in position like that, use your nylon end of your hammer to get that almost flush, and then so you're not beating on the sides of your receiver, use a nylon punch to actually flush it up. Now on the other side of the gun, do the same thing with the other pin. Small side in so that the knurled flared side is out. Almost flush with your nylon hammer, and then finish flushing it up with a nylon punch. And then those two pieces will be in just like that. This one engaging that return spring. There. All that hammering might make this plate on the other side pop off its post, so just make sure that it's seated on the post properly. Alright, first thing we need to do is we need to replace that little return spring and detent on this part of the lever. If you removed that, put a little bit of silicone grease on them so they stick and stay in place. Insert the spring, and then insert that detent. When you insert the detent, you'll have a flat end with this cutout in it, and you'll have this end that's kind of tipped. It has a tip machined into it. That tip is the side that you want facing out, and then just press that in until it goes in as far as it'll go. You need to replace the trigger return spring and the detent. They go into the hole at the back of the receiver, right there underneath the lever. Where the lever closes, they go right there. Again, put just a little bit of silicone grease on there so that they stay in place while you're doing everything else. Insert the spring first into that hole, seat it, and then your detent goes in next. That little detent has a flat spot and a rounded nose on it. The flat spot goes inside the hole with that little rounded nose sticking out. And again, just make sure it's seated all the way.